introduction. So welcome all of you. Welcome to this month's Etc. talk. So this is our talk that we do at the end of every month. And so as it's the end of February, we're going to have a talk from a painter. So we're trying to kind of theme our collections of talks. So we had an entire drawing term. We're now focusing on painting, and we're primarily looking at artists that work in oils as part of their wider practice. And today we're very lucky to be joined by Laura Smith, who is a British painter. She trained at the Slade and at the Royal Drawing School, which she shares with some of our previous speakers as well. And for anyone that's really quick off the mark, if you enjoy her work online today and you're in London and wanted to jump in and see it tomorrow only, she has an exhibition held at 155A Gallery in London at the moment, which you can look up by searching, but also I'll try and pop a little link to the exhibition in the chat as well, which will be closing tomorrow, or last day tomorrow. So if you wanted to jump straight in and go and see it in the flesh, that will be an opportunity. But the gallery will hold some of her work for a little longer after that, so you'd be able to get in touch with them if you wanted to find out a little bit more about it. Also, if anyone's really excited to hear about Laura's work, and particularly her work as an educator, as well as being a fine art painter, then she'll be teaching a course at Draw in the summer as part of our summer school, which I'm very excited about, to be able to have a still life focus course, which we haven't had really before, and I think will be particularly wonderful under Laura's tutelage. And for those that are online, Laura's going to be teaching a 4-week online course at the Winslow Art Centre, which is focusing on painting flowers, delicacy and colour. So that's going to be a course that she has come out, and I'll also share some details to that in the chat as well. Otherwise, though, we're going to have a wonderful opportunity to see some of Laura's recent paintings, and I'll be talking to her about her practice and about those paintings. So if it's okay, Laura, may I switch over to your screen so we can say
Please do. Yeah.
hello?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
This is such a treat, Laura. So if it would be okay, tell us a tiny bit about yourself before we launch in to see some of your work.
Yeah, well, I am someone that loves working from direct observation. I'm not very good at working from photos. I love to have something in front of me. And I did spend quite a few years working from people. Certainly when I was doing my BA at the Slade, I was working from direct, from the model. But then I got into portrait commissions, which it wasn't quite the same thing as having a professional model who was, absolutely didn't mind if you painted their face green or, gave them a funny hair or something. And so I kind of switched from working from people towards working from still life objects. And that was kind of during my master's, which I also did at Slade from 2010 to 12. And since then, I've really just absolutely loved working on my own in the studio with objects and just moving them around and bringing new things in. And I find it really freeing, really exciting. And I feel like it gives you an enormous amount of control because it's you with these objects, and you can move them about. You can take one out and put something else in, and you can change all sorts of colors. I find it really exciting compositionally because I've got hundreds of different colored fabrics, for instance, that you can instantly change the background. And So yeah, that's really that still life's absolutely at the heart of what I do. I do love to draw as well, and I do quite a lot of drawing, particularly in museums, because I love to work from directly from paintings. I find it really interesting. But yeah, the bulk of what I do is oil painting. So yeah, that's kind of me.
Thank you. I feel like that sets us up very well to see some of your work. So would it be okay if I put us onto the slideshow?
Yeah, please.
Fabulous. So thank you, Laura. So tell me, you've selected work from the last 3 years, is that right?
Yes, yes, it is. Because I just thought, in terms of thinking about what I'm going to be talking about and teaching in the summer with you, I thought this would be the most relevant because this is the place I'm in at the moment and the kinds of things that I'm thinking about.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if I actually said thank you so much for having me because I think this is such a wonderful series of lectures, and I feel really privileged to be one of your people, talking. So
Well,
thank
I
you.
feel very lucky to have you, and I think in a world where everything's very much short form, I love seeing everyone's work on Instagram and all of those tiny little sort of image-based media that we have to see work. But I feel like, we never have the opportunity to delve deeper into what goes on behind that work. And so this is just such a lovely chance. And having seen your work and sort of wanted to ask questions about it and about how you've kind of made some of the decisions and developments that you've made. This is just such a lovely opportunity to do that. And I think with these ones, the work that you've chosen here, I was really interested by the motif of the book as a subject and the open pages and the vertical position of it. And I wondered if I could ask you about that and what sparked that.
Because I feel like actually I mean, I'm sure your work is really broad, but some of it I feel like has a kind of magical, dreamlike sort of quality, almost surreal, and that's certainly something I feel is something I'm sort of striving for in my work. Now, the book, the idea, do you remember I said how much I love drawing from old master paintings in the National Gallery? And the book actually came out of a class that I was teaching about I used to do an online class regularly looking at a different artist each week. And one week it was Bronzino, who's a Mannerist painter, and we were looking at a portrait of a young man with his fingers in a book, rather like this. And it was actually it was in that painting, it was almost a little bit sexual, like the fingers were almost like legs. And I started to note, I loved the fact that it was this human body interacting with an object. And then I started seeing books kind of with with fingers in them, or being sort of half open in many different people, painters' works like El Greco and Tish and different people, different artists rather. And so I had been asked to sit for a portrait, which was a great honor. Someone called James Lloyd, who's a fabulous portrait painter. And he said, because I'd sat for him, he offered to sit for me. And I thought, I'm not sure about painting his head because it's just too intimidating because I'm not really a portrait painter. So I said, look, I've got this idea, this thing I'd like to do with hands in a book. Are you up for it? And he was very willing and game. So he came and sat, for this picture on the right. and those are James Lloyd's hands in the book. And then I thought I'd make a sort of kind of sister picture on the left, and it's my foot in the bottom. You can see it's quite murky, isn't it? But
Mhm.
but hopefully you can see a foot at the bottom. And so I put these in because I thought, into this slideshow, because I thought it's quite interesting to see. Well, it's something I do is make kind of series, even though this is a series of only two, they do relate to one another. And I quite like to have the same object appearing in another picture in a slightly different way. So
Mhm.
you've got the same book there, but on the left it's being reflected in this bowl of water that has a shell floating in it. So there's then the absence of the hands and the presence of other things. And the ribbons on the left that my foot are on are a response to James's portrait of me, which has ribbons on the floor next to me, which was actually a reference to my paintings because I love to paint ribbons. So yeah,
A wonderful
that's what's
conversation.
going on there.
It just works. Fabulous. Oh, thank you. And
Shall we go to the
yeah,
next, or yeah?
of course, yeah. So,
Were
um,
you going to say something, Jake?
no, no, it's interesting with this theme of recurring objects in paintings. But maybe that's something we can kind of reflect on as we go. Tell me about this painting.
Well, this one is one of three uh, that I think I made in 2022. I can, if anyone is particularly interested in when and actual dimensions, I can look them up. Um, but this one, it is a fairly large picture. I'd say it's probably a meter tall. Um, and this is one of three. And the idea was that I would, for the first time, make large, for me, large anyway, pictures that included perishable objects like fruit, flowers, a jelly, balloons, that sort of thing. And I thought, how am I going to do it when it takes me a long time to paint them and I'm not going to be able to paint them for long enough, before they disintegrate or turn into mulch, in order to create a large picture. I can do a small picture of a fish or a flower in a day, but something like this would take me a long time. I'd work over months on it. So what I did was I set up 5 or 6 objects that would be static, that would be there immovable for months on end, or however long I wanted. And that includes, in this one, the jug and the bowl and the white vase and the silver bowl. And then I could bring in these fleeting objects like the jelly and the fruit, and I can relate them to the objects that are always there. So, for example, the jelly was not there on the same day as the lemons, and the lemons weren't there on the same day as the plums. But I was able to bring them in and hopefully get them the right scale, and and sort of fitting in with the environment, because of the fact that I had the same reference points in the other, in the jug and things. And the other thing is that these ones are made in a gazebo that I have in my studio. So I used to have a little sort of cardboard box, and I'd kind of cut a hole in the side and stick a light in, because if you're trying to light objects in a quite and quite a sort of extreme way, so that you really get shadow and light, you want to have it in a sort of dark cave. And my wife takes photographs and she knows a lot about lighting. Yeah, that's another one of them, of the two, of the three of that series. And she said to me, why don't you should get a large thing like a tent or something. So I got this gazebo, and it's 2 meters by 2 meters, and it allows me to have lights on tripods that I can light, a large setup. Um, I can light a large setup. And so with these two, they both have the light shining on the top level. You see how it's like a table and then there's a kind of platform above.
Uh-huh.
These ones both have the light shining just on the platform above. And there's another one that I didn't actually include in this, which has the light on the objects at the bottom. So I'm quite interested in that, like how just the lighting can radically change a setup.
Mhm. So may I switch on to the other one just to see
Yeah, of course.
kind of
Yeah, so I don't want a dead fish hanging around for too long. So that just came in for a day. Um, and yeah, I included the newspapers, partly because I'm trying to make my work feel more contemporary and less like I'm trying to be a Dutch master or something. But even with, you know, the Times and the Guardian, it still looks really very old fashioned. But anyway, you are who you are, aren't you?
that's a great thing to mention. So what's your reasoning for that? Because I think I see a lot of still life that is deliberately attempting to hark back to a sort of tradition of historical painting. What's your drive for making it contemporary?
Well, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with harking back. It's just that I think you just want to feel like you are representing yourself. And I am, a person who lives in 2025, and I want it to reflect, yeah, who I am, I suppose. And of course, you're inspired by your contemporaries, and you want it to feel sort of fresh. I mean, it's not like still life is the most cutting edge thing to be doing. I love the fact that I'm part of a tradition, um, and really my favorite artists are long dead. But um, yeah, I think it's because I want it to be to really feel me.
Mhm. And for the kind of the narrative side of your works, it feels that there are lots of sort of personal elements coming in.
Mm.
Is it important to you that people can decipher the image, or are you intending for them to bring something of themselves to these objects that might be familiar to us? I live in Wales, so seeing leeks immediately makes me think of kind of Welsh culture. But I don't know whether that's anything.
Love that. I love that. Yeah, I mean, gosh, what a brilliant question. I can't believe I haven't touched on that. So, in a way, they are kind of anti-narratives because of the fact that I don't want them to look like a kitchen table with all the things that you might actually have on your kitchen table to make a meal with. And the reason is that I want the objects to feel as though they could be their own characters. So it's not just a fish um, that is there because it's going to be eaten, or because it's a meal. It it's there kind of as its own thing, but maybe there's a sort of duality because I mean, for instance, the ribbon, you know, that that doesn't necessarily make sense you know, to have a ribbon flowing out of a jug. In fact, there are two ribbons. So it's more the gesture of the ribbons kind of flowing out that is speaking of a kind of overflow or a sort of giving gesture or something. And very often my inspiration is to do with the gesture, like a sort of, you know, caressing or a holding or a pushing away or a or yeah, sort of, I mean, even just a kind of laying flat, like to imagine your own body in these different positions. I feel that the objects in their different relationships and in their different positions and gestures can be emotive.
What a wonderful answer. Thank you. Should I click through to our next page?
Yeah, yeah, please. So this is obviously much simpler. Actually, it came about, I don't normally do this at all, but I saw a William Nicholson painting. Actually, I only saw it on Instagram, but it was in a gallery in London. And it was of, I think, two pink peonies in a little vase with strong light on them that was casting an extremely dark shadow. And the shadow was so dark that I thought, I want to see it. Just, it felt unbelievable how dark the shadow was. And I thought, I want to set it up and just see how dark a shadow could be if it's lit from the front. And the shadow in this isn't anything like as dark as the shadow in the William Nicholson. And the painting was made, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was 1918, but it was certainly First World War time. And I thought, wow, he's obviously exaggerated the shadow to be like looming, like this sort of dark, I don't know, sort of monster behind the little flower. And to me, as soon as I knew when it was painted, it sort of spoke to me about something to do with the, you know, the state of everyone in that time. But in any case, I found it a very beautiful picture, and I thought I would also love to paint a little flower, pink flower. So I tried to find the closest thing I could get, which actually was zinnias. And then at the top, you might think, what is that balloon or what is it? And it's actually an apple that is hanging, and there's a little knot of string in the bottom because it's I've threaded a string through it, and that's how it's hanging. But I sometimes want it to be quite subtle, so that it's only through looking for a while that you think, hang on a minute, what is that and how can it be there? And I suppose I like wondering. I like scratching my head, looking at a big Manet painting and thinking, oh, does that little keyhole mean something? And you know, what is going on here? I quite like that.
Because I guess with that little piece of string coming out from the apple, you could easily paint over that and just make the apple float, but you're choosing to represent the string in order to make it clear that it's rational, but it's also there's a choice there. So
Oh my gosh, that is absolutely brilliant what you've just said. Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to say that, but you're completely right, because I could absolutely have something just floating, like you could completely have something floating or flying. And I don't know why I haven't done that yet. But there's obviously something I am interested in the sort of mechanics behind how, like wanting to see the harness, at the pantomime or something, someone flying. You want to sort of see how is that actually happening.
And I think that it makes it all the more intriguing because of that. Yes.
Oh,
I'm also
thank you.
interested to pick out something specific. This vertical line, perhaps a crease in the
Yeah, it
fabric.
is a crease. Yeah.
Um, Compositionally, it works so well to direct the eye. Is that again, I guess something you could paint out, but when you're thinking about compositional decisions, are they happening in the painting? Are they a drawing beforehand, or is it in the physical setting up of the whole thing?
I think it's a combination of setting up, taking time to set something up and trying out different things. And so sometimes, sorry, let me try and finish the sentence. So it's a combination of trying things out in the setup and then also responding to how the painting is, and maybe making changes during the painting or in the painting. But as far as setting up goes, I'll have an idea, like for instance, a knife stabbing down into a tabletop, and I might try it out, and sometimes it's exactly what I imagined. But very often it's not how I imagine, or even if it is, I can't find a way to paint it. So, but in doing, in trying to create what I have in my head, something better might happen. And I do love that actually about still life, is that you're not you are very in control, and you're more in control than a landscape painter or a portrait painter, I think. But you're not fully in control because you're contending with how the real world is operating. And sometimes things just happen and you didn't plan it. Like I can't even remember if I planned that crease to be right next to the vase or not, but I must have liked it. I mean, it's possible that I thought, oh, maybe it needs something, and so I moved the vase towards the crease. But it could easily have just been a sort of lucky thing that I then responded to.
Thank you. Shall I hop to our next painting?
Yeah, please. Um, so this one is called liquid fuel, which refers to the wax when it's burning being fuel for the flame. But this is an unlit it's a kind of fresh wick. I feel like the way it is, it sort of looks like it could be smoke kind of blowing in the wind or something. I like the way it goes out horizontally. Um, but I mean, I'd love to paint a candle actually lit, but there's no way I'm going to do that in the studio because of the fire alarms and stuff.
So,
I
so
don't want to burn everyone's paintings, can you imagine? But I like the idea of having the candle with the flowers. I think I would have brought the flowers back to the studio and thought they were gorgeous, and then felt maybe there needs to be some other element to for them to sort of interact with. Um, and I do like the way that vertical is so simple compared to all the rhythms in the flowers.
I feel like with a still life painting, one's confronting a lot of kind of raw, abstract compositional principles on the page, where with a figure, there's often like, you're sitting down with a person and you're spending a lot of time with them as a face, but our eyes always are drawn to faces, aren't they? So it's kind of a bit of an easy one sometimes for a portraitist. But how much are you thinking about the abstract qualities of a composition as you're making the painting?
Well, I'm certainly thinking about it a lot in the beginning,
Mhm.
um, when I'm composing it. So I would have intentionally um, cropped out the vase that they're in because I wanted them to feel. I suppose I often do like the idea of it being in a potentially outdoor space. Like some of the recent ones do feel a little bit landscape-like to me. And so I want them to sort of feel free, like evoking maybe being in a garden or something. I mean, I know obviously I'm counteracting that with the candle, but I but yeah, initially I'm thinking about that. I'm trying different backdrops as well. Like I remember this one, I had a much more yellow green with bits of the actual fabric was a kind of white and yellow, sort of almost spotty, blotchy material. And that absolutely didn't work for me because it was just too busy and it was sort of competing with the star, which is really that main tulip. And so then I changed the fabric behind. But in terms of how much I'm thinking about the abstract composition, I think I do it in sort of I think about it when I'm not painting. So if I'm taking a break, I might stand back from it and think about whether it's working or not. Or I might come back to it, another day and think about whether it's working, how I want it to compositionally. But when I'm in the middle of painting a flower, I'm just it's like painting I think of for me, it's a bit like painting a head. I'm just absolutely absorbed trying to get it to look as much like the thing that's in front of me as possible. Yeah.
And then will you have multiple paintings on the go so you can hop between them?
Well, that's my preference, but it's not always the case. With something like this, that those flowers are there for 2 days maximum. And even then, actually someone the other day said to me, she's a still life painter who paints a lot of flowers. And she said it's like a moving target when you're painting a flower. It's just constantly moving, even during one day often, which makes it exciting. But in this case, that's just one. I'm working on it, and then I move on to something else. But I love to work in series. I really do. And if I had a massive studio, I'd have 5 different setups all going at the same time, and I just hop between them because I really love not to be too precious. I love to have time to put something away and reflect on it. And what I really like is to come into the studio, look at my, I don't know, 4, 5 pictures and think which one is the weakest, which one is annoying me, and then I can dive into that. And then I've got that great sort of impetus. Whereas if you're just working on one at a time, which I have done a lot of recently, you kind of have to, you just have to keep working on it, don't you? And try and see it through. And somehow I find that a bit harder.
Mhm. How do you deal with a struggle in a painting when it's just really not working? Like, do you get rid of it? Do you try and work it all the way through?
Um, I mean, my most recent really big struggle. I actually asked another artist for some advice. Um, but I think definitely taking a break. You know, it's amazing, just fresh eyes coming back the next day, you can see something different. Um, so I think, yeah, I think probably that. I sometimes take a photo and then mess around on my phone on the train, trying to change different colors in it, you know, just sort of on the phone. I don't actually at the moment make preparatory drawings. And the reason I don't is because they change so much in the actual picture in the course of painting them that it almost feels pointless. And then the other thing is that I make my canvases in batches. So I just make up a whole load of different ones, different shapes and sizes, and then I can pick whichever one I think is going to work. And so when I'm setting up the setup, it's like a whole big environment. And I might end up making 4 pictures of different um, sections of it. So I don't, so it's not, I don't really know which bit of it even I'm going to paint. Like, I don't really have in mind the rectangle when I'm setting it up. I'm just trying to set up something that um, that feels exciting to me. Then I go and have a look at different rectangles and see which one might work. And then I suppose the scale of it is going to also have such a big effect on whether it's going to work or not. So to do a little drawing, even though I often recommend it, I can recommend making preparatory drawings to students, but I don't know, I just don't tend to do it. I tend to like to just launch in uh, and splash paint around. And I'm not someone that could, for instance, draw out a whole composition and then execute it. I make so many changes and it's very messy at the beginning. Yeah.
Your brushstrokes feel very fresh, though. If something's being changed, are you scraping the paint off and putting it down again, or are you overpainting?
I kind of wipe it off when I'm painting. Um, but I'm not someone that does a huge amount of scraping down. Um, I think I'm a strange combination of fast and slow because um, when I'm involved in painting something, I really like working wet in wet. Like this is a very fast picture. And I couldn't actually paint a flower head. I don't know, maybe it's because it's giving me this short deadline, you know, there's this deadline of it falling apart. But I do really like painting fast in a sort of fresh, spontaneous way. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it does. It does. Thank you.
Um,
Should we hop to the
do
next
you want to
paint
go? Yeah,
or paint?
doing for time. So this is another example of one of the series, you know, where I've got maybe 3 pictures going on at the same time. So you can see, you can probably see there's the same mirror and vase in both pictures. And the idea behind it was this pearl, just a single pearl that is sitting behind the base of the vase that you can't, as the viewer, see, but you can see the reflection of. So you can see the reflection of the pearl in the mirror, but not the actual pearl. And I suppose the whole idea is about seeking, it is about sort of yearning for something. But in terms of kind of composition, you can see that there are some things that have been, they're different from each other. So for instance, there's a little triangle on the right hand painting that is a shell, and that isn't there in the other one, in the left hand one. And there's a sprig of apple blossom that is in the right hand one but not the left hand one, and then the left hand one has another sprig of apple blossom sticking out of it. So I like to think that when I make series like this, they're kind of speaking to each other, and maybe, I don't know if it's really doing this, but I want it to feel a little bit cinematic, a little bit as though the objects have a kind of life of their own. Like, the on the left hand one, there are these dried flowers that are just underneath the vase, and in the right hand one, have they moved? Have they kind of scuttled away? Why aren't they there? You know, that's a sort of um what I'd like it to feel like the ballet, the Nutcracker, where all the toys come to life. I want it to feel a bit like that.
Wonderful. When the work is exhibited, would you like to see those exhibited together? And what happens when they're separated? And
Well, I think they cannot. I mean, I make them so that they can be separate, um, but so in this exhibition at the moment, these two paintings are opposite each other. But we're about to see, I think I've put in at least one buttercup one, and there are two that are hung next to one another. And I do like it if they're at least in the same gallery, so that you maybe have been thinking about one, and then you go upstairs and you think, oh, that's kind of like the one we've just seen, but it's different in some way. Um, yeah.
tell me about ribbons.
Ribbons began when I'd seen a Richard Tuttle exhibition installation in the I'm sorry, the Tate Modern. And it was really vast with huge swathes of material. And one of the things I particularly remember was this huge pile of fabric, kind of strips of fabric. And I remember, so there's that, and me thinking about kind of cutting up fabric. And then I had a setup where I had a shelves, and I wanted to bind the shelves, like wrap them up in some way. So I had been painting sharp objects like scissors and knives, and then I kind of used the blades to cut up these strips that I then used to sort of wrap up these shelves. And then I just started thinking, oh, well, maybe I can buy beautiful strips of fabric that are made, like that. And I see them when you give your attention to something, you start seeing it everywhere. So I look at Georges de la Tour painting or Velasquez painting, and I see ribbons on sleeves, and I think, oh, how beautiful those are. So I really love the fact that you can get them in any texture, in any color. They can be shiny, they can be whatever you like, but also you can move them wherever you like. So if I wanted, it's like being able to be an abstract painter, because I'm tied to these objects. I have to have something in front of me. So I'm then able to have, if I want a red line or I want a blue vertical, hey presto, I just get a ribbon out. But also there's the kind of tension versus relaxation. So sometimes I'll have something hanging or two objects kind of pulling away from each other, and the ribbon will be taut. And there's a kind of stress there. And then at other times, it's languorously, just flopping. And this is an example of a ribbon that's just really easy and relaxed.
It's going to make me look at ribbons in paintings in a completely different, wonderful. I think that's a good.
Do you want to go to the next one? Um, so more flowers. I feel like there was something I was gonna say just now, um, but it's gone. But it'll probably come back. So this is actually quick painting, even though it's a relatively large painting for me. And one of the things I was interested in here was uh, intentionally changing the scale of objects. So you can see in the bottom center, there's a little white geranium in a vase. And then slightly to the left, there's actually, believe it or not, the same geranium in the same vase, but I've blown that up and I've shrunk the other one. And I thought, how would it be if I had small things, if I shrank the things in the foreground and enlarge the things in the background? What's that going to do to the picture plane, to the space? Is it going to squash it? Is it going to make things feel strange? And I think because of the fact that flowers, leaves, vases can be any size, it probably doesn't actually feel strange. But I hope that they feel as though they're interacting, they feel characterful, and a lot of in a lot of my work, I see them in an anthropomorphic way. So I see them as little characters with their own feelings very often. Um, and we'll hopefully see more examples of that as we go along. But this is an example of a picture that I feel is kind of landscape-like. I see that expanse as a kind of sky, and I'd like to dive into that a bit more with my work, landscape.
Actual landscape or still life that.
Well, I'd like to, because it's amazing how many paintings are still lifes with a landscape in the background. And sometimes it's just a window, but sometimes it's actually objects on a beach or in a somehow in a garden. And I'm sort of thinking about Winifred Nicholson, for instance, with her dreamy, evocative windowsill paintings, where they feel like they're sort of Chagall-like. They've kind of blown into a night sky or something. So but I'm not sure practically how to do that without using photos, because, as I said, I'm not very good at working from photos.
So would it mean going out into the landscape to paint?
Yeah, it would.
Scary.
Yeah.
Should we go across to the next
Yeah.
one?
So this one is, I just had this idea of a fish kind of chasing another fish, and to have kind of one half of one and one half of another head and the tail. And they are sitting on, in reality, a kind of patchwork of these little sheets of different sized paper that I'd painted watercolor on. Because again, as I might have said, I like to move around colors and fabrics, and to try and think about the composition. And that was a way I felt that I could inject a little bit more interest for myself, beyond just having one complete solid fabric.
And this the kind of table edge or the board edge coming towards
Yeah.
us, it's sort of horizontal. It's kind of a motif that's kind of gone through a few different paintings here. Like, is that something? So is it very consciously horizontal? Is that providing deliberate stability for the painting?
That's really lovely of you to bring up because, yeah, I do really love horizontals and verticals, and a lot of the painters that I look at and love um, also do like that. And I think it's because of the very nature of the rectangle and like you say, stability, something that feels calm. Like I love paintings that have a stillness and that have a real sort of settled, calm quality, um, like I don't know, like a Chardin or Giorgio Morandi. There's something very calm um, about horizontal bands. Um, so yeah, I find myself using um, those shapes, those kind of rectangles, really quite a lot.
Am I right? You visited Morandi's studio last year.
That's right. I did. Yeah, it was a real pilgrimage, and I've wanted to since I don't know, I was 15 or something. And now I'm 44, and finally went to see his studio and see the museum that they have in Bologna in Italy, with so many of his paintings and drawings and etchings, and I absolutely loved it. Yeah.
Um, are there particular artists that have been influential for you at particular points in your development as a painter?
Yes, I mean, I've got a sort of permanent top five, which are all dead men. But Rembrandt, um, who we all know, I love the humanity in them, and also the very expressive brush marks and the way he's using paint in such a varied way. Chardin, Jean-Simeon Chardin, who's an 18th century French, basically still life painter, and he really is if anyone's going to be the king of still life, Chardin is. Um, I love Manet. I love his quite elaborate still. I love all his still lifes, but I really love the quite elaborate ones with, great big salmon or huge, pile of peaches or melons and knives and all sorts of things going on. I love Monet for the light and color and brush. I often really respond to playful and imaginative mark making. Um, Constable, actually, absolutely love John Constable. Again, that exciting, energized paintwork, as well as these very settled compositions that he spent a long, long time working out. So he'd sort of do these oil sketches outside, but then spend a long time creating just the right composition in the studio. But contemporary artists, I love Jennifer Packer and Lynette Yedamboachi. There are huge numbers of contemporary painters that I love, and I'm really excited that there are more and more painters who are kind of getting nominated for the Turner Prize and having great big Tate shows. When I was a student in the 90s, that painters, figurative painters, they weren't in the spotlight in the way that a lot of figurative painters now are, which is really exciting.
I think that's it. I think we do live at a really exciting period for anything potentially having a platform in the contemporary art sphere. and
Yes.
feels like nothing is being arbitrarily excluded from the limelight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I will say to everyone that for everyone that's joining us tonight, the recording of this will be available in the week afterwards, and I will try and link to some of the artists, as many as possible that Laura's mentioned here, because I think it's really nice just to be able to follow on and to explore some of these things yourself. So thank you, Laura, for providing us with a nice little bit of homework as well to be able
Oh,
to look through.
oh, thank you, Jake. That's really kind.
Um,
Should we go to the next one?
Let's go to the next one. And I'm conscious as well that we're running relatively close to the
Yeah.
end. If anyone did have questions, do pop them in the chat and we'll go through the last of Laura's paintings, but I'll just keep an eye on those as well. Sorry, Laura.
Brilliant. So this is a peach and the head of a sardine, quite large actually, even though it's just a little picture. We can go through to the next one. This is one of the buttercup ones I was saying that is currently in a show with its friend. And I had the idea with the ribbons, but then at the last minute I thought, it needs something. So I brought in the buttercups and they're just the stars of the painting, I think. And the next one hopefully is the other. If you go to the next one. I think that's the other one as well. So just imagine it without any of the yellow flowers. It's a completely different picture. So I do like the freedom that still life gives you to add things in as you go. We can keep going to the next one, if you like. So this is a huge ostrich feather that is hung from strings. Um, and this is one of the largest pictures I've made. I think it's 1.5 meters tall. So it's a really, you've got a lot of electric blue in your face. Do you want to go to the next one? And then that's another large one. And this relates to, what I was saying about the tension and relaxation. So you've got some of the ribbons really taut, and then other bits of them just sort of flowing really easy. Um, yeah, should we go to the next one? And this is about, this is a pile of salt just sort of being poured and held in place just by gravity. And then you've got these two apples, and the one in the foreground is blown up to be larger than it would be. And I'm just interested to know whether that can read successfully or not. And then I think the next one's the last picture, which is the most recent. And this is a large picture, something like 1.5 meters wide. And this is called scene, as in a scene in a film or a play. And the reason I've called it that is that I feel that all of the flowers are kind of embodying different emotions. So the one on the right is sort of downcast, and the two in the middle hopefully are kind of locking eyes, looking at each other. So that, they feel to me always as though they've got some kind of character, or feeling that they're giving something off to me. That's so often the motivation for making a painting, for me.
And again, I think like with the ribbons, I'm going to go back through your paintings and start to see the characters in them now as well. Now you're describing it in that way. Um, thank you. If I just take us off of the screen share for a moment, um, thank you so much, Laura, for giving us such a wonderful introduction to your painting. And I hope it is just an introduction, because I hope that everyone will be able to go on and explore more of Laura's work. May I ask you some of the questions that people have put to us, Laura?
Please, and I do want to say I'm so sorry that I've babbled on so long.
Oh, it's
But I'd love, if you have time for questions, I'd love that.
If it's okay for you, if we just have 5 minutes and then
Please, of course.
um fabulous. Oh, a very quick one. Alessandra's just asked and said some complimentary things about your painting of light and shadow. Are you using electric light for your setup?
Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. I'm always in natural light myself with my palette, but some of them are lit, like particularly the ones, anything with a sort of black background, that will very often be in extreme light with electric light on a tripod in my gazebo, but a lot of them are just daylight.
Fabulous, thank you. Um, and Gemini said, is playfulness part of your process? That's a lovely question.
I love that question. And yes, I mean, I'd love to be more and more playful. And I think it's only as, the older I get, the more I realize that that is not only okay, but actually it's one of the things that makes me me and is really, really exciting. So yeah, definitely. I want to be very playful with the language I use. Yeah, in the paint. Do you know what I mean? Like the way, the style I'm using, the manner. I want to feel like I can be playful, like David Hockney's so playful, isn't he? And I love that.
Fabulous. That definitely comes across. Lauren's asked whether you ever draw inspiration from surrealist painters or surrealist techniques.
Well, I do. Yes, I do. Uh, um, yeah, and I am definitely drawn to anything that has a surreal edge, and I really love it if it's somewhere between realism and surrealism. Uh, I find that really exciting. Perhaps more than something that's very obviously completely made up. I quite like things that are on the cusp.
And there's a great question about the time that you spend arranging your compositions. Does it take you a long time to set up a composition? You were talking about sort of back and forth as well.
I think it does. I think I would say, relatively speaking, it does. And so if I've got a student who's saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm taking a long time over this," I always say, "No, this is a really important part of it to try out different colours and and experiment." So yeah, I'd say I definitely give myself all the time I need to do that.
Laura, have a lovely evening and hopefully speak to you again soon.
Jake, thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. I'm going to draw things to a close there. See you again next time.